Chianti. Welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Paul Moss. There's been a furious reaction from Israel to the suggestion by Brazil's president that the country is carrying out a Holocaust against Palestinians in Gaza.
President Silva has disgraced the memory of 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis like the most virulent anti-Semite. He should be ashamed of himself.
Reports suggest hundreds of people have been arrested across Russia after showing support for the late dissident Alexei Navalny. We take the temperature in a small town in Ukraine as the country prepares to enter a third year of fighting. Meanwhile, nuclear war, the Holocaust, speeches at this year's BAFTA Awards reflect the seriousness of our times.
There are all kinds of individuals and organisations who have fought to reduce the number of nuclear weapons in the world, and they show the necessity of efforts for peace.
Plus the elderly Italians who attempted to rob their way into retirement. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm David Harper with BBC News. A minister in Israel's war cabinet, Benny Gantz, has said that unless Hamas releases all hostages in Gaza by the start of Ramadan on March the 10th, the military will launch its offensive in Rafah. This is the first indication from Israel when its forces might move into Gaza's southernmost city. From Jerusalem, here's our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
By the start of Ramadan, the war would come to Rafah. That's 3 weeks for Israel to devise and implement a plan to evacuate an estimated 1.3 million civilians. The Israeli military has done it before in Gaza City and Khan Yunis, but in each case thousands died. With those cities, Israel told civilians to flee south, but in Rafah there are only two options: go west and north into open sandy ground, or try to cross into Egypt, where the authorities appear to be building a walled enclosure close to the border.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reacted angrily to the Brazilian president after he accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Luis Inácio Lula da Silva compared Israel's actions to the Holocaust. Mr. Netanyahu said he had crossed a red line by trivializing Hitler's extermination of millions of Jews. Here's Mimi Swaley with more detail.
This isn't the first time President Lula da Silva has thrown his hat into the ring with strong word choice. The outspoken left-wing president is pushing for Brazil to take a more present and progressive stance on the world stage. Lula's criticism of Israel's operations in Gaza are the latest in a chain of strong criticism from the region. Like many other leaders in Latin America, he is unafraid of making international controversy through bold statements.
Police in Papua New Guinea say more than 50 people have been shot dead in a massacre in the country's highlands. Reports say the victims were all killed in an ambush in the isolated Enga province. There have been numerous incidents of tribal fighting in the region since 2022. Last year, the authorities announced a lockdown for several months. Police in the US state of Minnesota say 2 officers and a paramedic have been killed in a shootout in the city of Burnsville. A third officer was wounded during an exchange of fire with a man who had barricaded himself inside a family home with 7 children. The Burnsville Police Chief Chania Swartz had been speaking about her colleagues being killed and injured in the line of duty.
This is a hard day. It's a really hard day for our public safety family. We're hurting. Okay, we're hurting. Today, 3 members of our team made the ultimate sacrifice for this community. They are heroes. Our officers, our fire department, our families, all of our staff, our community. We're heartbroken.
The attacker also died. World News from the BBC. Tens of thousands of demonstrators have held a protest in Mexico City's main square against proposed changes to the body that organises elections. The opposition accuses President Andrés Manuel López Obrador of trying to undermine the National Electoral Institute ahead of polls in June. Mr. López Obrador has been critical of the Institute, a non-partisan organisation, saying it's biased. France is to cut government spending this year by nearly $11 billion. Making the announcement on French television, Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire said the cuts would affect all government ministries. He said they had been prompted to take the move because the wars in Ukraine and Gaza, as well as disruption to shipping in the Red Sea, had led to a cut in forecast for economic growth in France from 0.4 to 1%. A woman is recovering in hospital after a cougar attacked 5 cyclists in the US state of Washington. The group encountered the big cat on the trail east of Seattle. The authorities removed one cougar from the scene. Eyewitnesses said a second animal may have been involved, but officials were unable to find it. Cougars are rarely seen, and attacks on humans are uncommon. The last fatal incident in the US was in 2018, when a mountain lion was killed. The makers of Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's movie about the creation of the atomic bomb, have been celebrating a night of success at the BAFTA Awards in London. It won 7 prizes, including Best Film, Best Director and Best Actor. Cillian Murphy addressed the audience after winning the first BAFTA of his career.
Oppenheimer was this colossally naughty, complex character, and he meant different things to different people, and you know, one man's monster is another man's hero, and that's why I love movies, because we have a space to celebrate and interrogate and investigate that complexity.
That's the latest BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom with me, Paul Moss. So, will they, won't they? Israel seemed to give an indication on Sunday that its military are delaying their invasion of Rafah at least until Ramadan begins in March. More on that later, but meanwhile there's the row over those remarks by Brazil's President Lula da Silva about the war in Gaza. Israelis are no strangers to harsh words coming their way, particularly since the country responded to the attacks of October 7th by invading Gaza. And yet this is one avenue of attack that really does set Israelis on edge. Comparing the Jewish state's behaviour to the Nazis, suggesting the Israeli military is effectively carrying out the Holocaust against Palestinians. Mr. Lula may not be the first person to draw such an analogy, but as president of the most populous country in Latin America, his words pack more punch than most.
What's happening in the Gaza Strip with the Palestinian people has no parallel in history. In fact, it did happen when Hitler decided to kill the Jews.
It should be said that Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is himself not exactly shy when it comes to attacking his foes, both inside the country and out. But President Lula, he said, had crossed a red line with his Holocaust remarks.
By comparing Israel's war in Gaza against Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization, to the Holocaust, President Silva has disgraced the memory of 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis, and he's demonized the Jewish state like the most virulent anti-Semite. He should be ashamed of himself.
It's not just Benjamin Netanyahu who's reacted this stridently to President Lula's remarks. His government's made up of politicians with very different views, but when it came to the Holocaust comparison, the response was unified, as our correspondent in Jerusalem, Paul Adams, explains.
From the president on down, we are hearing expressions of total outrage. Isaac Herzog reminded people that they had found in Gaza a book published by Hamas which praised and glorified Hitler's ideology and the Holocaust, and he said that it was an immoral distortion of history to compare what Israel is doing to the Nazis. There were similar comments from the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. So I think across the board there is a sense of complete outrage because Israel simply does not accept any suggestion that what it is doing in the Gaza Strip could be remotely compared to the actions of the Nazis. Benny Gantz, who's a member of the War Cabinet, saying that if hostages are not freed by the beginning of Ramadan, which is in precisely 3 weeks, Israel will launch its offensive against the city of Rafah. The fighting, he said, would continue everywhere and include the Rafah area. He went on to say that Israel would act in a coordinated manner, facilitating, in his words, the evacuation of civilians in dialogue with our American and Egyptian partners, words which may add to the speculation that some Palestinians in Gaza may find themselves having to seek refuge outside the Gaza Strip, possibly in this walled enclosure that the Egyptians are building nearby on their side of the border. You know, this is obviously tough rhetoric designed to concentrate minds and to send a stark warning to Hamas. So it could be part of a bargaining effort to try and force a deal on the release of hostages, or it could be a genuine warning that this offensive is coming and that Hamas should know that. And you know, most Israeli politicians and military figures are on the same page here. They all say this is an assault which will happen.
Exchange of views. It's interesting to note that President Lula has not been one-sided about the Gaza conflict. He roundly condemned Hamas when it launched that assault on October 7th. So why has he chosen to make these latest remarks, knowing as he must have done the response it would get? I'm joined here in the studio by Leonardo Rocha, our America's regional editor. Leonardo, what is Lula up to?
He was in Africa. He was during a media conference in Ethiopia, and he was asked about the decision by some developed countries to cut aid, the amount of they have pledged and they were willing to donate to help Palestinians in Gaza. And he said that was absurd. And he went on to say that's not a war, it's a genocide. And he just, I think, got enthusiastic about his views and his anger. He said 30,000 people had died, and then he made a comparison with the Holocaust, which basically shocked everyone. He has, in the same interview, of course, criticized Hamas, criticized the killings, and he was not one-sided on that. But what everyone was shocked about in Brazil and abroad was the fact that he said that Hitler had done the same thing. So that's the response that he got all over the world.
Lula is, as I said, president of the most populous country in Latin America. It's also something of a regional economic power. I'm wondering, will his words have any effect internationally? Are other people going to sit up and take notice?
If anything, I think he'll get a backlash. He must be traveling back to Brazil now and thinking of what he's going to say to explain that. But they probably didn't expect the international response because President Lula has been quite controversial, quite outspoken in his thoughts. He expresses it in his thoughts. He's been indeed trying to put together a movement of what they call the Global South, the BRICS, with Russia, with China. Also, he was in Africa, and there he said we have to boost our links, commercial and links with Africa, not only with the US and the developed world. So I think it's in this context he was talking about.
Very briefly, the views he expressed, are they typical of leaders in Latin America these days?
That's very typical. The only president in Latin America that has been critical of this sort of position from the left is the Chilean president Gabriel Boric. You had Colombia, Venezuela, all of those not only seeming to side with Russia or being tame in their criticism of Russia during the war with Ukraine, but now the right in Latin America, President Milei, on the side of Israel and the left on the side of the Palestinians.
Leonardo, thanks very much indeed. While that diplomatic row continues, even as the fighting in Gaza continues, there are also legal efforts underway to curtail Israel's actions. Monday will see the Palestinian situation go to the International Court of Justice in the Dutch capital, The Hague, where there'll be hearings to decide the legality of Israel's 57-year occupation of Gaza and the West Bank. Now, this case predates the current conflict and was initiated by the United Nations General Assembly, as Ala Holigan explains.
In December 2022, the UN General Assembly guidance on two questions. What are the legal consequences of Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories? And what implications arise for other countries and the UN as a result? The unprecedented number of countries due to take part in these hearings reflects growing international scrutiny of what's happening in the occupied territories, which has intensified since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas and Israel's military response in the Gaza Strip. Advisory opinions aren't legally binding, but the hearings could have an impact on and provide an insight into global allegiances that may influence future peace negotiations. Israel is not taking part. It doesn't recognise the ICJ's jurisdiction over its occupation of the West Bank and argues it's a political rather than legal issue. The Palestinian delegation, which will speak today, hopes the court's opinion will help to achieve a two-state solution. This is the second time the UN General Assembly has asked the World Court for an advisory opinion in relation to the occupied Palestinian territories. In July 2004, the ICJ found that Israel's separation wall in the West Bank violated international law and should be dismantled. Israel has ignored the ruling.
Anna Holigan. Even in death, the Russian dissident Alexei Navalny has proved capable of rousing people to protest. Across Russia, his supporters have been laying flowers in his memory, and many appear to be paying a price for their show of solidarity. A report from the AFP news agency says that 154 people were given 2-week prison sentences for this in the city of St. Petersburg alone. Our Eastern European correspondent Sarah Rainsford reports.
Russia doesn't want acts of commemoration for Alexei Navalny to become acts of protest. So since he died, police have arrested dozens of people across the country, including a priest who wanted to lead a prayer service. Men in black hoods keep clearing away the flowers so that the scale of support for Navalny isn't obvious. But in Moscow, there are fresh flowers and more people, pausing to remember a man who campaigned against corruption, against the Kremlin, and for change, and who was imprisoned for that. This woman described Navalny as a hero. She says he fought for Russia to be free and not a dictatorship. Another says he opened her eyes to what Russia is and to what it's doing in Ukraine. It was for denouncing the invasion of Ukraine that another opposition figure, Vladimir Karamurza, was imprisoned. Today, his wife Yevgenia told the BBC that in her view, Vladimir Putin has been left unchecked for too long.
All that impunity that lasted for decades led him to believe that he's somehow untouchable. And for as long as he's sitting in the Kremlin unchecked, we will see more warmongering, we will see more repression.
Navalny's body still hasn't been released to his family. There is still no information on the cause of his sudden death. So his political team are accusing the authorities of a cover-up. They don't trust them, especially since he was poisoned with a nerve agent 3 years ago. Navalny always said he was fighting for what he called the beautiful Russia of the future. As one of his aides put it today, he just wanted a country that was normal.
Sarah Rainsford, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Ukraine's president was trying to make the best of the situation. In a week which has seen the town of Avdiivka fall to Russian forces, Volodymyr Zelensky used his nightly address on Sunday to insist that the battle continues. But there's no hiding that this represents a bitter defeat, as we reported last night. One soldier described the road out of Avdiivka as being littered with Ukrainian corpses. And the horror continues. Ukraine says it's now investigating reports that soldiers taken prisoner in the town were murdered by their Russian captors. Drone footage allegedly shows the killings taking place in a ditch. Our correspondent Andrew Harding has returned to the frontline town of Liman to assess the mood there as the war enters its 3rd year.
A pontoon bridge across an icy river. We're driving back to Liman, a frontline town in eastern Ukraine. It's a year since our last visit. Liman is still in ruins. It was seized by Russian forces, then liberated in 2022, but the nearby front lines have barely moved since then. Alexander Rogovets, 74 now, is still here. He's surrounded by cats and still living in the wreckage of his old apartment block hit by Russian missiles. As he shows me the ruins, he says he's had a rethink about this long war.
I want peace, peace, peace.
So has your opinion changed?
Changed, many change.
So this is interesting. He's changed his opinion over the course of the last year. Before he said Ukraine had to win this war. Now he's saying there's been too much death, too much suffering. He wants talks, even if it means giving up land. Peace is more important than victory. You can feel the weariness on the streets of Liman. A crowd of pensioners queuing here for food. They barely react to the muffled boom of an explosion from the front lines. Our youth are being exterminated. If this continues, there'll be no Ukraine left, says 80-year-old Nadezhda. This war will go on for a long time yet, says Pasha, maybe hundreds of years. it's not all gloom here. Council workers are out doing what they can. The war is too close for major reconstruction work, but they're trimming trees and paying pensions. And a younger generation is just getting on with life. School is mostly online, but every day children gather in these classrooms for help with homework and just to meet up. Laughing with her friends, 14-year-old Anya says, "I've got everything I need here. I don't want anything else except peace and calm." A year ago, we found families hiding from the war in these dark cellars. And today, their apartment destroyed, the Dimitrenko family are still down here. But there's regular electricity now, the television showing the latest news, and water can be pumped from a well in the yard. Filling her bucket, Irina, an accountant just home from work, sounds quietly determined. We're waiting for victory, she says. We're all tired, but I don't see how we can negotiate with murderers. Liman's mayor has moved his office for fear of more Russian missiles. He's now worried that America will stop supplying weapons to the Ukrainian troops protecting his town. We're fighting a monster, says Alexander Zhuravlyov, so we need more outside military help. Our soldiers are doing their best, but they're running out of guns and ammunition. Fresh snow blankets the town as we drive out. No one place can capture the mood in this vast country, but perhaps Liman, torn between despair and determination, gets somewhere close.
Andrew Harding in Ukraine. Time for the latest sports news. Now here's Paul Serres.
Rasmus Højlund scored twice as Manchester United beat Luton 2-1 in the English Premier League to make it 4 wins in a row. United manager Erik ten Hag was delighted with match winner Højlund.
We always believed he's a fantastic striker. He has great abilities, he's very young. He needed some adaptation. Of course, when you then don't score, something with your belief is going on. But he's a strong character, and that is what you see in this moment. And now he's scoring, and now he has a lot of confidence, and it looks like every ball is going in.
Simon Adingra scored twice as Brighton thrashed Sheffield United 5-0 at Bramall Lane. Adingra was part of the Ivory Coast squad that won the Africa Cup of Nations on home soil a week ago, but says he is happy to be back and contributing to 3 points in the English Premier League.
Yeah, it's a good week. Like, I come from winning the AFCON. And yeah, I'm here now, focused on the league. So yeah, feel good. I feel good because yeah, of course I won the AFCON, but it's gone now. So yeah, now the Premier League. So I have to focus and a new challenge.
Cricket, and India thrashed England by 434 runs in the 3rd test in Rajkot to take a 2-1 series lead. The tourists were set 557 to win after India declared their second innings on 430 for 4. England were bowled out for just 122. And in tennis, the Australian Open champion Jannik Sinner beat Alex de Minaur in straight sets to win the Rotterdam Open and move up to 3rd in the world rankings, the highest ever for an Italian man.
Paul Serres. Serious times call for serious entertainment. That seems to have been the attitudes of judges at this year's BAFTA Awards, who dished out prizes to films with very serious subjects indeed. This year's ceremony will not be remembered for the frocks the stars wore or the speeches by winners tearfully thanking their mum or their favourite schoolteacher. The most prizes went to Oppenheimer, a biopic of the man regarded as the father of the atom bomb, who went on to bitterly regret his role in making possible such destruction. That won 7 awards, including Best Film and Best Director for Christopher Nolan, who spoke about the continuing efforts to rid the world of nuclear weapons.
There are all kinds of individuals and organisations who have fought long and hard to reduce the number of nuclear weapons in the world, and since its peak in 1967 they've done it by almost 90%. Of late, that's gone the wrong way. In accepting this, I do just want to acknowledge their efforts and point out that they show the necessity and the potential of efforts for peace.
The Best Documentary Prize went to the film 20 Days in Mariupol, which follows life in the besieged city during Russia's invasion. And then there was the Zone of Interest, which focuses on the man who ran the Auschwitz concentration camp. His family happily pursuing their lives, even as mass murder continued just across the wall from their well-kept garden. Accepting the award for Best Film Not in English, the producer James Wilson drew parallels with current conflicts.
A friend wrote me after seeing the film the other day that he couldn't stop thinking about the walls we construct in our lives, which we choose not to look behind. Those walls aren't new from before or during or since the Holocaust, and it seems stark right now that we should care about innocent people being killed in Gaza or Yemen in the same way we think about innocent people being killed in Mariupol or in Israel.
Well, present at the ceremony was our arts correspondent Colin Patterson, who talked about one of the other big winners of the night with 5 awards.
Poor Things, Yorgos Lanthimos' fantastical reimagining of Frankenstein with Bella Baxter played by Emma Stone, who won Best Actress, playing a woman who has a baby's brain inserted into her head. It's as out there as that description makes it. The Zone of Interest became the first film ever to win Best British Film and Best Film in a foreign language. Jonathan Glazer's film has really struck home this year. It's about a family who live over the wall from Auschwitz and how mundane their life was while the Holocaust was going on over the wall. Finally, one film that won nothing, despite all the talk, and being the biggest film of the year at the box office, Barbie took home absolutely nothing. And one other point worth making, the BAFTAs have been a terrible indicator of who's going to win in the Oscars in recent years. Only one of the last 9 films to win at the BAFTAs has gone on to repeat at the Oscars. But I do think that Oppenheimer will win in 3 weeks' time.
Now we've got a story that certainly sounds like a movie. One last job, that's the sort of phrase you hear in films, where career criminals reassure themselves that what they're planning is just one final robbery before they retire to a quiet life of luxury funded by their ill-gotten gains. But in Italy, a gang of elderly alleged armed robbers have fallen foul of this movie trope. The law caught up with them before they could make that final getaway. Paddy Maguire reports.
It wasn't just the police who put a stop to their next and maybe final job. An ongoing investigation into robberies at post offices in Rome revealed intercepted phone calls. In one, a gang member complained that he couldn't sit on a getaway scooter because he was having incontinence issues and needed an operation on his prostate. But after a series of successful armed heists, their luck has finally run out in even more pressing ways. A failed burglary in the Don Bosco area, caught on camera like all the others, has led to the arrest of the 6 gang members on charges of armed robbery. All in their 60s or 70s, the crew was led by 70-year-old Italo De Witt, known as the German. He had form going back 30 years, most notably getting away with $120,000 from an armed hold-up at a bank in the mid-1990s. Another key figure was a 75-year-old who acted as the lookout. One got hold of replicas of backdoor keys. 2 specialised in drilling holes in the masonry, often working through the night or at weekends. Another actually carried out the robberies. In May last year, they allegedly got away with more than $200,000 in one day. But the money will not be much use now, as they will no doubt be spending their retirement behind bars.
Paddy Maguire, you'll be listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Paul Moss. A reminder of the main news. Israel has condemned comments by Brazil's president likening its actions in Gaza to those of Hitler. A member of Israel's war cabinet has said the military will move into the overcrowded city of Rafah unless Hamas releases all hostages by the 10th of March. Remember, you can hear all our news programmes live on the internet at bbcworldservice.com. But for now, that's it, and from all the team here at Broadcasting House in London, goodbye.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. In an hour, Crowd Science is asking, what time did we set the first clock to?
Interestingly, we don't really know who invented either of these things. There aren't names attached to the invention of the sandglass or to the invention of the first mechanical clocks. They just start showing up.
Then People Fixing the World hears how changing cultural biases has improved mental health treatment in Nigeria.
One of the things that we have shown to be effective in reducing stigma is contact. When people make physical contact with people with mental illness, they are less likely to have stigmatizing attitude to them.
And at 4:30 GMT, the conversation is with two women using the arts to document climate change.
Part of the attempt in Seed Change is really to entice the audience to learn more about the climate crisis and its impacts on frontline communities by using different approaches, including the visual.
All of that to come on the BBC World Service.
In a couple of minutes on the BBC World Service, we'll have some of the more uplifting stories from around the globe, like the 8-year-old Irish boy who sang in front of tens of thousands of people at a rugby international and a star was born. I promise you will smile. The campaign in India to encourage appreciation of the people who do the vital job of waste picking, and the penguin who helps out his short-sighted penguin pal. All that and more after this summary of the latest world news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. A minister in Israel's war cabinet, Benny Gantz, has said that unless Hamas releases all hostages in Gaza by the start of Ramadan in 3 weeks' time, the military will launch its offensive in Rafah. This is the first indication from Israel of when its forces might move into Gaza's southernmost city. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reacted angrily to the Brazilian president after he accused Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Luis Inácio Lula da Silva compared Israel's actions to Hitler's extermination of the Jews. Mr. Netanyahu accused him of trivializing the Holocaust. Police in Papua New Guinea say more than 50 people have been shot dead in a massacre in the country's highlands. Reports say the victims were all killed in an ambush. Thousands of demonstrators have held a protest in Mexico City's main square against proposed changes to the body that organizes elections. Police in the U.S. state of Minnesota say 2 officers and a paramedic have been killed in a shootout in the city of Burnsville. The shooter also died. He had barricaded himself inside a family home with 7 children. The British Museum has turned off comments on one of its social media posts because of a campaign led by a Chilean influencer demanding the return of 2 stone statues to Easter Island. A woman is recovering in hospital after a cougar attacked 5 cyclists in the U.S. state of Washington. The group encountered the big cat on a trail east of Seattle. And the makers of Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan's movie about the creation of the atomic bomb, have been celebrating a night of success at the BAFTA Awards in London. It won Best Film, Best Director, and Best Actor. BBC World News.
Come on, Ireland! I'm Stevie Kilkenny, and you're listening to The Happy Pod.
He's quite right. This is the Happy Pod from the BBC World Service. I'm Jackie Leonard, and in this edition, uploaded on Saturday, the 17th of February, the 8-year-old who became a media sensation after singing in front of tens of thousands of people at a rugby international in Dublin.
When there's pressure on, Stevie has always delivered, so yes, we're very proud of him.
We'll hear about the campaign in India to encourage people to see waste pickers differently.
These people are not just waste pickers, but they are recyclers, they are entrepreneurs.
Celebrating 10 years of the Africa Prize.
What the Africa Prize has done is that it's really shown that innovation happens everywhere.
Also in this podcast, meet Joe, a man unafraid of a challenge.
It's kind of a setting of like a midlife crisis, like a guy who's 40's doing the marathon, I think.
On long distance running, dealing with a stammer and learning a foreign language. And a very special penguin partnership. Now, whether you're a sports fan or not, there can be something very uplifting about the pre-match ceremony. Teams and the crowd united in singing their anthems. And ahead of the Six Nations Ireland-Italy rugby match in Dublin, teams, tens of thousands in the crowd, audiences at home and on social media were blown away by this. 8-year-old Stevie Mulrooney singing the Irish rugby anthem, Ireland's Call. spoke to Stevie and first to his dad Seamus about talent, staying calm under pressure, and newfound fame.
He didn't always sound as good as he does now, shall we say that, but he always was an entertainer from the time he could walk and talk. He was doing magician shows, he was singing. He used to sing Johnny Cash and even Queen, Freddie Mercury, Jackie, and what would happen is if he forgot a word, he would just improvise, and I was always amazed at how he used to do that. I will say, anytime he's had to perform in public, when there's pressure on, Stevie has always delivered. So, yes, we're very proud of him, as you can imagine, Jack.
I can imagine. Stevie, okay, we're getting a picture of you as a born entertainer, but that was a big crowd. It would have been easy to have been overwhelmed by just the scale of the whole experience. What was going through your head?
Yes, I was very nervous with the big crowd. It was very hard, but I got over it when I sang, and the nerves just went when I got into the song.
And when you're preparing for something like that, the things that you had to worry about are the tempo and the acoustics, because you won't necessarily be hearing the same thing that the people at home are hearing.